Hello, History of Medicine students. This is Professor Bowen here with some comments on our Week 5 discussions. As a lot of us saw when talking about translation studies, and in particular the translation of Indian medical texts into Chinese after the fall of the Han Dynasty, most Buddhist proselytizers who wanted to spread their ideas about health and the body in China used what we call domesticating strategies when translating their texts into Chinese. This was the preferred approach, but you may be wondering if this was the only approach that translators took. One of the questions that came out of our conversations last week was, did Buddhist translators ever opt for a foreignizing strategy? And the answer to that is yes, in fact, they did. They opted for foreignizing strategies, particularly when Buddhist scholars were writing about and interacting with Taoists, who were kind of their main source of competition in the centuries after the collapse of the Han Dynasty. This is because Taoism experienced a kind of revival or resurgence at the time. Many ex-Confucianists preferred Taoism, which was a homegrown wisdom tradition, to Buddhism, at least initially. And so Buddhists had to go to great lengths to try to convince Taoists that their beliefs were wrong and that they should become Buddhists instead. For those unfamiliar with the term, Taoism, one way you can think of it is it's basically the opposite side of the Confucianist coin. Confucianism is all about civic morality, good government, the realm of human social affairs. By contrast, Taoism invites people to withdraw from public life and to give up education by returning to nature and contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Taoism in its origins, and particularly in the post-Han period, was quite religious philosophy, especially in a medical sense, where Taoists commonly attributed sickness to supernatural causes. On the whole, Taoist medicine was fairly eclectic, but it regularly included things like confession, repentance, chanting scriptures, praying, and the use of amulets and talismans. Its practitioners sometimes also made use of sacrifice and engaged in exorcistic acts. For Taoists, health in and of itself was less a goal than a means to an end. The end, for Taoists, was immortality and spiritual transcendence. Through a variety of techniques, Taoists sought communication with the Way, the fundamental unifying energy of the universe from which qi originated. Taoists tried to gain access to the powers of deities and spirits by doing things like drinking alchemical elixirs and partaking of different sexual practices and breathing regimens, that all of that they thought would allow them to indefinitely extend their lives. Probably the best known Taoist of the post-Han period, that is like the 3 centuries after the collapse of the Han Dynasty, was a guy named Sun Simiao. Legend has it that early in his life, Simiao was offered a government position, but in traditional Taoist fashion, he turned this down in preference for a life spent searching for medical cures on Mount Eme in what is today Sichuan province. After spending decades on the mountain, he composed a book that was called The Priceless and Essential Formula for Emergencies. It was published around 652. And it contained about 5,300 different medical recipes. As Sun Simiao's life indicates, like their Buddhist rivals, Taoists were trying to make medical care more widely available, and to this end, they often published texts. Buddhist scholars in China were aware of these texts, and much of their own writing was dedicated to refuting Taoist medical theories and practices. Indeed, in the centuries after the fall of the Han Dynasty, Buddhist and Taoist writers frequently hurled all manner of foul words at each other. Interestingly, at times, this war of words centered on translation. For example, there's one really interesting Buddhist text from around 570 AD, which is called Laughing at the Tao. It's a book that belittles Taoists for misunderstanding Buddhist translation terms. Here, in books like this, Indian translators took a much more competitive or combative approach. They were interested in stressing the foreignness of their ideas so as to make Taoist philosophers look ignorant when they tried to translate these into Chinese. In some of these books, Buddhist writers openly attacked their Taoist competitors. One good example of this is a 5th century compilation called A New Account of the Tales of the World, in which we learn about a Buddhist healer monk named Yu Kafai. At one point in the story, Yu consults with a patient who is experiencing intense pain due to a condition of the bowels. This patient just happens to be an ardent Taoist believer, and after taking his pulse, Yu explains that the man's illness is the product of what he calls, quote, excessive zeal, being over-faithful in his belief in Taoism. Upon taking one of Yu's prescriptions, the man defecates several wads of paper, each as big as a fist. Yu inspects these wads of paper, and they turn out to be Taoist talismans that the patient had earlier swallowed after he first became sick. So this is an example of a more combative text in which translators decided to portray Indian medicine as something that was incompatible with Chinese medical traditions, because they realized that doing this would then help them eliminate a potential competitor in the post-Han Chinese medical marketplace. So if you're wondering if translators ever took a foreignizing approach, here's a good example of ways that they did. If you have any other questions about this or things we learned in week 5, please do feel free to let me know, however is best for you. If not, I'm really looking forward to our discussions this coming week, and I'll see you all real soon in our virtual classroom. Bye-bye.